treat somebody who has a phobia or an anxiety disorder. I've been working with anxiety disorder clients for over 20 years now, and doing CBT and being specialized in clinics for anxiety for a while. And what I'm hoping to impart to you today is to give you a sense of what it's like to have somebody coming in with an anxiety disorder, how we would work with that in a cognitive behavioral therapy context, and how we understand why exposure therapy can be so effective as a treatment tool. So one of the things that Dr. Subramanian was talking about that I think is important to highlight is that among all the different disorders that have anxiety as a key feature, one of the things that helps me understand it is that among all of them, there's a key kind of single underlying kind of tying piece, and that's the overestimation of danger. So whatever it is that's triggering the anxiety, it's an overestimation of how threatening or how much risk they have when they're presented with that trigger. I'm a little afraid of clowns, so I put that there as possible phobia. Oops. And so, for example, I just listed some of the disorders that Dr. Subramanian had talked about, and panic disorder, which I'll actually present a case on, is the fear of panic symptoms or bodily sensations. So these clients, their trigger is anxiety symptoms themselves. We have social phobia, which is the fear of negative evaluations. Specific phobias can be anything. Usually there are clusters that we will see time and time again, including clowns. Generalized anxiety disorder, this one is interesting because it's mostly about the uncertainty of the future. So this is causes people to have chronic excessive worry. And then there's OCD. Their triggers are unwanted thoughts or urges that come into their head. So they have this sudden feeling like they might push someone over a bridge, or they see some dirty stuff and they think, oh my God, I might get really sick if I touch that, or I may have touched that, I didn't know it. And PTSD, it's usually the traumatic events and memories of it that cause that feeling of threat. So I prepared a little compilation of several of my cases, and I thought it's always more fun to actually hear like a case study. So I didn't memorize it, so I'm going to read it, but I'm hoping that it'll give you a nice window into what it's like for somebody who has panic disorder. So I named her Miss My Reputation Is Everything, and this is something I often hear. I treat a lot of people who are in the tech space or in high demand where you're really expected to perform, and everybody has to look at ease and like everything's cool and everything's fine, but at the same time working several hours into the night. So I named her Joanne. Joanne walks into my office with a bright smile. She comments on the plants in my office and how she has a hard time keeping her own plants alive. Joanne is white, lives in San Francisco, is 35 years old, works at a large tech company, and has recently been promoted to a senior managerial role in graphics/UX design. She grew up in SoCal with her younger brother, who is still in SoCal and with her parents. She described having a tight-knit family and frequently flying home to visit her parents and brother, who still live there. She's not married, but she's been dating her boyfriend for almost 2 years. So I asked Joanne what her reasons are for seeking therapy. She smiles and says, well, I guess I'm a bit of a stress case. I mean, I've always been a bit of an anxious person. I mean, I'm not really a type A or anything, but I do worry about a lot of things, which is probably how I get things done. I'll have a few sleepless nights here or there, I'll pull an all-nighter. Yeah, I can be a bit of a procrastinator, and I tend to leave projects to the last minute. I also hate public speaking and talking in public. Anyways, ever since my promotion, my anxiety has really caught up with me. I'm in charge of 2 teams, and I feel like I can't get my own work done because I'm constantly having to deal with the stresses of the people on my team. Luckily, I can work from home 1 day a week, but even then, I'm constantly getting pinged by people. I try to work in the evenings, but then I feel guilty because I never spend any time with my boyfriend or my friends. My boyfriend, Jack. Jack's great. I think we'll probably get married, and yeah, I really want that, I think. Well, well, I know I want family and kids, and I'm not getting any younger, so, but I don't know, I can't imagine. Well, maybe, I don't know. And Joanne suddenly bursts into tears. And she starts saying, I can't believe this is happening. This is so embarrassing. And then she collects herself and says, so things got really bad about 2 months ago. I had my first panic attack. I woke up to go to work, nothing special, not thinking about anything really at work. While I was getting ready, I started feeling really dizzy. My heart started pounding like crazy. I couldn't breathe. I was sweating, and I thought I was going to die. So I called 911. By the time the ambulance came, I was feeling a little better, but I was still feeling really shaky, and my heart felt really off. So they took me to the ER. They ran a bunch of tests. I followed up with them. With more tests, and I learned that I was having panic attacks. After the first attack, I started having them every couple days. Not as bad as the first one, but enough to make me leave in the middle of meetings or conversations at work. I've been falling behind at work because I'm so worried about having a panic attack and being embarrassed. I carry a bottle of Xanax around just in case, but it totally makes me feel drugged when I take it. I can't work. I don't take BART anymore. I can't exercise. I can't even drink coffee. Basically, I try to avoid anything that might cause me to panic or feel off. I'm really, really proud of the reputation I've built at work and with the people I know, and I can't lose that. It means everything to me. I know I'm not going to die if I have a panic attack, but I'm really worried that if I have the symptoms or I'll start acting strange or crazy. My reputation is everything. I know Jack is really worried about me. My family's worried. And I'm really sorry. I'm not feeling well. I think I need a drink of water. Just give me a minute. And then she starts putting her hand on her neck. And she starts feeling her heart going. So how does cognitive behavior therapy work? And I think a lot of people have an image of how therapy is, and probably, I know some of you are actually therapists here, so you may already provide cognitive behavior therapy, but the way I think of CBT and how it is different from maybe other forms of therapy is that it's very transparent, with a very clear rationale for what we're going to be doing in therapy, why we're doing it, and we have a clear formulation of how all the problems that you're coming in with are maintained. And then once we create that model, we decide together, okay, how are we going to disrupt this model? How are we going to be able to change the symptoms that you're experiencing so that you actually can have the life that you want? And then let's monitor and make sure that we're actually giving you interventions that are helpful to you. And so it's very data-driven, it's structured, and it's collaborative. And I talk about it being iterative in that I don't have it right the first time always, but we're constantly talking about what we're trying. Is it working? Is it not working? Exposure therapy, I know Dr. Subramanian was talking about it as a subset of CBT. I often think of it as an intervention that's used within CBT. And it's extremely effective in reducing unwanted or high anxiety. And exposure therapy is basically taking whatever it is that is triggering your anxiety and exposing you to that trigger so that you learn, so that you can experientially learn that there's been an overestimation of the threat. So for example, with Joanne, she had developed a fear of panic. So for her, I might start off with a generic model of panic disorder. And I'm just for the interest of time, show you really quickly what it looks like. Oops. So basically we talk about how if your heart rate is increasing, so here did you see how she was holding her neck like this? So she's closely monitoring her heart, and we talk about how, at any moment of the day your heart rate is going to increase at some point. But if you're looking for it and you see that as a signal of danger, that's going to raise your anxiety, and if anxiety is what you're afraid of, what's the chance you're going to find it, particularly if you're monitoring for those symptoms? It's quite high. And once that happens, you're going to start thinking things like, oh my God, it's happening, everyone's going to notice, my reputation, your anxiety goes up, and more symptoms, and we have that feedback loop until you get to the point where you say, I have to get out of here. And with that, it leads to the things that Dr. Subramanian was talking about and what Joanne was talking about in terms of how it limits your life, and it can happen so quickly. So how exposure therapy works. In the past, it's interesting, a lot of people used to talk about exposure therapy as the extinction of fear or the habituation to the fear trigger. For sure, a lot of you, maybe back in your old college days, have learned about those classical conditioning experiments where someone rings a bell and then they like shock the rat, and the rat freezes. And then slowly the rat learns to freeze in response to the bell. Right? So then, what we then learned, I'm sure you guys remember, is that with extinction was that if you keep ringing the bell over time, the rat stops responding. And people used to think, well, the fear got, was somehow extinguished or is no longer there. But what we now understand is that the fear never actually goes away. Instead, what's happening, and this is what Dr. Subramanian was kind of alluding to, is that instead, what the rat is learning is that they're actually safe now. And so that pathway of fear is still there, but they've learned now, now the bell doesn't actually represent a danger. I love this. How many times have you heard people say when you're like really worried about something or anxious, like, don't be anxious? It doesn't work. I'd be out of a job if that was the case. I think this really highlights that anybody with an anxiety disorder, there's so much shame that often comes with it because they know that they shouldn't be anxious. They know it doesn't make sense what they're afraid of, that they can't stop, and they can't help feeling it. And part of this goes back to that you have to be able to learn that this trigger is safe. You can't just be told. And so how do you learn that something is safe? And what we know is that it has to violate your expectations. So if you think something bad is going to happen, you need to repeatedly get information and experience that it's not. And it has to happen in multiple contexts. So, for example, that rat that learned that if you ring the bell and it doesn't freeze anymore, if you take that rat and you put it into a new context and you ring the bell, when we thought the fear was extinguished, guess what happens? The rat freezes. The rat learned it was safe in that context, but in this new context, it's better to be, safe than sorry, so then it goes back and it shows that that fear never went away. In the same way, we need to try multiple contexts in which we can show the client that you're safe. And it has to be repeatedly reinforced. So, I'm going to continue on with Joanne and read on. So Joanne and I have now met a couple of times, and she has a really clear understanding of how our fears and avoidance increase our chances of having panic attacks. Just by understanding this feedback loop alone, Joanne feels less anxious, but she still worries about panic attacks. I totally hate how these panic attacks are harmless and how I'm making these problems worse, but I just hate it. I just wish I could go back to never having these problems. In addition to other things, she and I discussed how her panic attacks have caused her to learn that these symptoms are dangerous. We talked about the benefit of exposure therapy to learn that the symptoms are actually safe, and the importance of experiential learning. And one of the beauties of having panic disorder and why it's so CBT can be so effective for it is that it's so easy to access the trigger. They're bodily sensations. We can create bodily sensations. We can create bad feelings in our body. I remember one therapist told me she made a client drink like 3 or something like 8 espresso shots or something like that to create heart rate acceleration through the day. Something crazy. But we also can do things in sessions. We try to do it in a lot of different contexts. And I thought it might be fun if I got you guys to do one of the exercises that I do with my clients. How many of you are familiar with these exercises? No? Yay. Okay, so I know it's going to look a little odd, especially now that I have a mic, so I'm not going to do it with a mic, but what we're going to do is we're going to actually hyperventilate or overbreathe for like 30 seconds. And the way I'll do it with you. This is what I do with my clients, because otherwise it looks kind of funny if I'm just staring at the client over breathing. But you're basically going to be making, it can be interpreted differently, but it really is effective. So we're going to try for 30 seconds. Can I get you to time us for 30
Absolutely.
seconds?
Yes.
And the way we're going to do it is to breathe like this.
Go.
Go.
Stop.
Okay. I feel tingling in my hands. What do you guys feel? Feel tingling in my hands? What else? Sorry? Your lungs hurt. Heart rate is a little bit up. Do any of you feel lightheaded?
Oh, totally lightheaded.
So in these circumstances, I get the clients to take on these symptoms, and it can freak them out into thinking, oh my God, it feels exactly like how my panic feels. But then when I'll talk to them about things like, think about when you were a kid. We used to do these things for fun. We used to roll down hills. We used to spin around in chairs. And as my husband said, sometimes people would choke themselves out or something like that. These things, I don't know, I never did that. And it shows how, depending how you think about those sensations, really changes the experience. And so things we do with the client is I'll often do this and have them do it again. And just with that little story can change the feeling. And also, if you repeatedly do it, it becomes less of an issue. And you can start feeling like this is safe. And so one of the things we try to do is that we repeatedly do these types of exposures, and we will find over time anxiety doesn't go up as high, and it comes down a lot faster. So one of the questions I often get from clients is that, I am constantly going into my feared situations, and I often hear this with people who have social anxiety, like I'm always going to parties or I'm doing meetings. I feel like I'm doing exposures all the time. How come I never got better? How come you're saying that it's good for me to face my fears, but I'm always facing them? And the reason for that is because when you're in these situations, you're more likely than not doing things to escape. So even if you're in the situation, you are doing subtle things to avoid what you're afraid of. So if you're socially anxious, you might sit in the corner of the room, you might hold your glass really tight so you don't look like you're shaking, you might quickly end conversations. You're doing basically everything you can to get out of whatever it is you're afraid is going to happen. And you're not really learning or violating your expectation. That is why new learning is not happening. So I talk to people about, there are lots of different forms of escape. It's not just about leaving. I talked about safety behavior, so things that you do to try to keep safe within the situation, but there's a lot of other kinds of escape behaviors too. Rules. If you make a lot of rules of how something should be done, you don't have that flexibility. It's an escape behavior because that is how you stay safe. I do it this way, I have to have my routine, I have to have it all, it's all optimized. But it's an escape behavior as well because you're not allowing yourself to handle situations that are uncertain or that come up. Planning or researching. How many of you spend hours looking on Amazon before you buy a TV? Right? That's that uncertainty. You're trying to escape that anxiety of what if I make this wrong purchase? Maybe not TV, but something bigger. Worry is also an escape. When you feel nervous about the biopsy test or something, or whether or not you got a good job, we will start worrying. And part of that is because we can't handle not knowing. And so we'll start going through scenarios. Reassurance seeking. Asking somebody, did I sound okay? Did I look okay? Am I gonna get the job? Do I have cancer? When they really probably don't even know. It's also a way of escaping. So one of the things that I'm so excited about with the VR exposure therapy, with VR and exposure therapy is that it can hit all of these three things that will allow for new learning: the violation of expectations, the multiple contexts, and the repeated reinforcement, you can create and access situations that I've never been able to access in my therapy office. In planes, for example, sometimes I'll have clients like go into a closet or something, but that's not the same thing. Or you'll try to watch YouTube videos, but it's not even close. And so I'm so excited about the different ways that VR can help us. Thank you.